Jaron Jarvis Channel, Top 20 Scary Stories of the Day from Reddit nosleep. 2018-09-22. Story 1, if you're offered a study drug called Aliamol, don't take it. When I was a teenager, this is how my day went. I'd wake up at 6 a.m., and go downstairs. If I was lucky, my mother would be asleep. If she was awake, the first hour of my day would be focused on making myself as small and invisible as I could. If I so much as clinked a coffee mug on the counter, I'd face a whirl of insults. Annoying. Fucking useless. Shut the fuck up, Kiara. Are you going to pay for all of the shit you've messed up? She never hit me. I had it okay. I took deep breaths and repeated this to myself when things got bad. Then, I walked an hour and a half to school. It was dusty and muddy, and if it rained, I'd pull my thin coat over my head, but I'd still end up soaked through when I arrived. I think that's why I didn't have any friends. Who'd want to be friends with the weird girl who was always covered in muck and filth? I didn't blame them. This day was different. It was the day before the final exams, and I'd applied to a university far away from everyone in this town. The furthest one I could afford. A university so far away that they wouldn't know the annoying, dirty girl with the stammer and old hand-me-down clothes. Walking through the hallways was the usual horror show. People ignored me at best. There was the usual bunch of girls hanging out in the bathrooms, and as usual, they fell silent when I came in. I kept my eyes to the floor, washed my hands and went into a cubicle. I could hear their laughter before the door had even swung shut, and I gripped my skirt in my sweaty hands and swallowed the embarrassment down. So fucking weird. I caught snippets of their voices, whispered, "She looks like a school shooter." That triggered a new set of giggles. "What are you taking the night before the test?" I gripped my skirt again and looked down. "Oh, I don't know. Probably modafinil. David sells it outside the gates after classes finish. Helps me really concentrate, you know." I could feel the cogs in my brain turning. I had to get out of here. I had to get into that university, the one 1,000 miles away from all these people and their poorly concealed hatred for me. I'd heard enough about modafinil, even under the rock I apparently lived under, and a spark of interest ignited in my chest. That's why I went to the gates at the end of class. I saw David, the guy who had been held back a year, leant against the bus smoking a cigarette, and all the anger and hatred I felt for the people who had made my life hell carried me towards him. "I want to buy something." He stared at me, his mouth open. "You want to buy something?" "Modafinil." I told him firmly. "I've got money." He paused for a moment, enjoying the silence as I waited. "Well, look at you knowing big words. I'm out of modafinil." His grin was making my face burn. "Got a new study aid in though, if that's what you're after." "How much?" £40 for a pack. I knew he'd sell it to the other girls for a quarter of that price. I balled my fists, then handed over a few crumpled notes. He handed me a small brown bag and turned away, obviously done with the conversation. The study drug itself came in a pretty unassuming white packet. There were just basic instructions and Aliamol on the front. I put it in the bottom of my bag and kept my head down on the walk home. I slipped into my room, like I always did, and took out my books, and the packet. Take one tablet to feel a complete change of attitude. It seemed pretty sketchy, but I figured if all the other girls could handle taking it, then it was probably going to be fine for me. I popped a bright blue pill out of the packet, and swallowed it with a sip of water. The last thing I remember is feeling an overwhelming desire to sleep. Weird, I thought, and tried to fight it. Maybe it was a side effect, maybe I had bought the wrong kind of drug. I couldn't sleep. The final exams were tomorrow, and I desperately wanted that extra security net of a night of studying. It would be fine, I reasoned, if I just closed my eyes for a moment. Surely that couldn't hurt. I woke up in the dark. My head was burning, for lack of a better word. It felt like a fever contained in one tiny part of my brain. I scrambled for my phone, thankful that it was still night, and that I might have a chance to get some more done. 6:13 a.m., 28th of September. Great, my phone was glitching. I heard my mother wandering around downstairs and wondered if I should risk going down for a coffee and a paracetamol. The burning in my head wouldn't stop and I knew I had to risk it. I walked down the stairs in my socks as quietly as I could and slipped into the kitchen. Kiki. My mother's overly cheery voice made me jump. Up early? I looked at her, my mouth agape. She hadn't said something to me that wasn't an insult for nearing months now. She hadn't called me Kiki since I was a child. Yeah. She looked me up and down with a smile. I just wanted to say that the talk we had, it changed everything. I'm sorry for behaving like I did. My look of complete confusion wasn't fazing her. The talk? You were right. It's never too late. She gave me another warm smile. Right. Breakfast? My expression made her falter for a moment. Everything okay? I paused, shook my head. I'm just worried about finals. Results aren't coming out for another 3 weeks. Why worry? I looked down at my phone again. 28th of September. The words seemed to pulsate on the screen to the beat of my headache. I don't understand. Finals are today. A glimmer of the old sneer shadowed on her face. Don't start acting weird again, Kiara. She rolled her eyes. We've had such a good week. Don't spoil it. We sat there, and ate breakfast together for the first time. I tried to keep up with her chattering about her new boyfriend. I'd only seen his shoes in the hallway and by 9 a.m. I knew every detail of why he was an idiot. According to my mother, anyway. Thankfully at 9, my phone started buzzing again. Hey Kiki. A high-pitched, excited voice was on the line. Why was it calling me Kiki? Who is this? Don't be silly, it's me. Angela? I racked my brain and realized the only girl called Angela in our school was one of the girls who congregated by the bathroom and said nasty things about me. Hey. Still hanging from last night, huh? She laughed. Me too. Whatever girl, it's the week after exams. We can basically do whatever we want. Her voice took a low, confidential tone. I'm so glad you came though, Kiki. You know we were all like, whoa, what is going on when you showed up, but oh my god. The way you told Bradley off. I don't think he'll be showing his face in public again. I mean. I could hear her tinny laugh over the static. The rest of the day was a strange fever dream. People looked me in the eye and smiled as I walked past. Occasionally I'd hear someone call Kiki. And I'd be hugged by a stranger who would have tripped me over a week prior. I was invited to parties and everyone was just desperate for me to be their best friend. I was scared, and didn't know how to be anyone's friend, and I think that's why they got bored of me. The attention wore off. People realized that I wasn't the person I had been for a week, this weird Kiki figure that was so fun and so pretty, and they lost interest in liking me, and hated me again. I sat for an hour after my mother had screamed at me, looking at the white packet of pills, before I took the second one. 50 people came to my leaving party. I saw a photo of 50 smiles when I woke up, and I barely recognized anyone's face. In the middle, there I was. Kiki looked beautiful. Her hair was French plaited and her outfit was daring but classy, and as I looked into her eyes, scrunched up with a laugh I could almost hear, I couldn't help but cry. Of course they wanted this version of me. I didn't blame them. I don't understand why I don't remember what I do when I take Aliamol. All I understand is that finally, people love me. For the first time in my life, people care if I have a bad day. People hug me when I'm sad, and even though I should hate them for how they treat me, the real me, I can't help but long for physical contact. I don't know what to do these days. I thought I could leave Kiki behind when I went to university, but there was a man with a lit cigarette standing outside the gates when I finished my first class, and I knew, hopelessly, that my anxieties hadn't stayed in my hometown. They had flown over with me, and I needed to be better. Sometimes I let Kiki stay for weeks because I can't stand the look of disappointment on people's faces when they realize that I've gone back to how I was. I think after this, I might let her stay forever. If you ever get the chance to buy Aliamol, or a new study drug that claims to give you a complete change of attitude, say no. There won't be any of yourself left in the end. Story 2, God is a Woman. His face haunted my dreams. It was like he was the demon I couldn't shake. Or the devil himself. I saw him in every guy I spoke to. Every guy I tried to date. It made me sick. The stories he told me about what he'd do to me if I left still scared me. Every time there was a crackle in my phone I wondered if he'd tapped the line. Did that even make sense? Did anything? Then one day I got the call. It was more of an really. A simple "did you hear about Josh?" followed by an even simpler "he died this morning." I was floored. I cried. Although I wasn't sure if it was sadness or relief. No more nightmares. No more awkward dates. No more worrying about the boogeyman in the closet or under the bed. He was dead. It weighed heavy on me. He was a recovering alcoholic, his excuse for everything. I don't remember I was drunk. He'd always say. My darkest days he'd say never happened because he didn't remember. Well, I did. And I carried the scars of it. I fell asleep easily that night. No longer worried about him sending someone to kill me. Him wanting to murder the guy I liked. No phone tap. I was safe. When I opened my eyes again I had to squint as I looked at the dazzling light in front of me. I thought I was dead. And then I saw him. Standing in front of me at the bottom of the stairs. I looked to the side and saw his father, and beyond him was the woman I'd only seen pictures of. His mother. She died when he was 11. His father a mere 2 years earlier. I looked to the other side. His younger brother Timmy. As far as I was aware neither of us were dead. Josh was on his knees now. Tears in his eyes as Stacy, his mother, stepped forward. She began to speak as if giving a speech about his life. She talked about how he and her started drinking when he was 7. Behind her, as if it were a television, it showed her story. As if to corroborate. It was heartbreaking seeing this child drinking. Even more so to see his reaction to her wrapping her car around a tree just a few years later. He didn't handle it well. It started his downward spiral. Next was his father. Dave spoke of his own demons. His struggle with pills and meth. How he'd passed it down to his son. Again it showed on the wall behind us the story. It showed them smoking meth. It showed him bumming drinks off his son. It showed all of the things a parent should have discouraged their child from doing. Even worse was when it showed Dave's death. The gun in his mouth. The top of his head being blown away. And Josh finding him. It got better from there. Timmy stepped forward. It showed happier times. The two of them playing. Them reminiscing about Stacy. Timmy was nervous. You could tell. It was a confirmation. A slap in the face. Heaven was real. So was hell. When Timmy stepped back I knew then it was my turn. I stepped up, my eyes on him. At some point I'd started crying too. My cheeks were cold. My eyes burned. He smiled slightly at me. All of these people said wonderful things about him. I'd never been a vindictive person. I'd always hidden my emotions. He'd been part of the reason I did. I swallowed harshly and opened my mouth. My story began behind me. The sounds echoing, causing his mother to sob. His father to shake his head. His brother to gag. I narrated my own horror story. As I spoke the images came back to me, flashing before them. Him on top of me. Me crying. Me telling him no. Him telling me how loose I felt for a virgin. Him ignoring me. Him forcing himself inside me. I clenched my hands as I continued. His hand around my throat. My head banging against the glass picture frame. Him throwing furniture. Him pumping me out for fixes. There I was sitting on his bed with him holding a knife against my leg, describing to me what I'd look like as I bled out. Who would miss me? How he'd kill my family. Me having a panic attack. And that laugh. That soulless laugh as he enjoyed it. Relished it even. Then we were under the bridge. He was telling me stories. The kind that still haunted my dreams. Images of him shooting kids in the face. Him raping a woman with a hunting knife. The kind of things you can't unsee. Then they asked us. They asked us what we thought should happen to him. Where we thought he should go. All 3 members of his family said he repented. He'd changed. He wasn't like that anymore. I was not as forgiving. I'd spent the last 6 years pretending to be normal, holding those things deep in my chest, letting him crush my relationships with friends, family, and men. I'd been scared of shadows, of men with knives, of strange sounds at night. I looked at each of the other three, and for the first time in my life I found her. I found the vindictive side of me. I hope you suffer, just like you made me suffer, I told him, my gaze planted firmly on his shit brown eyes. When I woke up the next morning I took a deep breath. I got out of bed. I ate breakfast. I started a diet for the first time in years. I began my day with a slight smile, a hopefulness I'd lost. I called my mom and ignored her concern over his death. I spoke with friends, none of which honestly missed him. They didn't miss his inconvenience. I ignored his new fiancée, because I knew. As pictures of the funeral flooded in, I watched in curiosity. His family all wore jeans and nice shirts. Pictures of him after he'd cleaned his act up a few months earlier surfaced. His fiancée didn't even attend. Neither did I. There was a post on Facebook. Hundreds of people posted in it. He was such a good guy. Another one gone too soon. And my favorite. He's in a better place. You see, God is woman. And she is just as vindictive as I was in that moment. Because if heaven is real, then so is hell. And that's where he would rot for all eternity. I've never slept better. Story 3, Why my wife no longer babysits. So my wife is a qualified nursery nurse. Because she's good at her job, she's on good terms with most of the parents of the children in her room, and from time to time, some of the parents would ask her to babysit for them on the side, knowing that their children already feel comfortable with her and that, because of her job, she's the perfect candidate for looking after children privately in their own homes. One day, the parents of one of the quieter children asked her to babysit for them whilst they're at a function. Now they lived quite far away, a lot further than she's normally prepared to go, but like most things in life, the money was good, so she didn't think twice. She asked me to drive her there and pick her up, as the house was on the middle of Dartmoor and she wasn't confident driving through country lanes. Now when I say it was on the middle of the moors, I mean there wasn't a house for miles. It's the type of place where if you spend too long outside at night, even the wind howling will sound like someone whispering to you out from the darkness. So, as the good husband that I am, I drive her to this house. We get there after a 30-minute drive to find this old, worn-down cottage. Draped in darkness and aesthetically, exactly how you'd imagine a stereotypical farmhouse to look. Outhouses, barns and a thatched roof cottage, complete with chicken coops and various old farming equipment that I can only imagine has laid dormant on the grounds for many, many years. Almost like a shrine to a forgotten time, to when engines and automatic equipment were a new invention and farmers still relied on hard work and tools that had been passed down for generations, having never failed before. She gets out of the car and I kiss her goodbye, and she is enveloped into the darkness as she walks towards the front door, my headlights illuminating the house in the type of way that makes it look like it's menacingly staring at you. Now signal is non-existent on the moors, even in this day and age. Being able to make a phone call on your mobile or even text is a luxury limited to the outskirts, closer to the main towns. I didn't hear from her until I picked her up later that night. When I saw the front door open, she bolted and ran to the car, not once looking back. I thought she was excited to see me, but when I saw her face, it was pale and she'd obviously been crying. She told me to drive, and for 10 minutes we sat in silence. An awkward, unnerving silence. After she'd composed herself, she told me what had happened. The night had started like any other. After she'd arrived, the parents greeted her and gave a quick tour of the house. The boy she was babysitting was already ready for bed and the parents left for their function. After watching some cartoons, she ushered the boy upstairs to bed and read him a story. The boy was around 4/5, I can't quite remember. About an hour later, she heard movement upstairs. Thinking nothing of it, she continued reading her book, but the noise became louder to the point where she went upstairs and found the boy hiding under his bed. She scolded the boy for being out of bed when he should be sleeping, but the boy seemed frightened and was adamant that there were monsters in the house. My wife told him that monsters aren't real and put him back to bed. She went back downstairs and another hour passed when she heard noises coming from upstairs again, louder and different from before. Before she had a chance to get up, she heard the boy scream, so she raced upstairs, to the boy's room, but he wasn't there. She searched the upstairs for him and eventually found him cowering in fear in the bathroom. He'd hidden in a wicker laundry basket, the type with a lid that you could still see through. The boy was scared, beyond belief, she later told me on the drive home. She'd comforted him for a little while and seemed confident that he was fine after explaining that the scratching noises were probably mice in between the floorboards and there was nothing to be frightened of. Ghosts and monsters aren't real and that there is definitely nothing in the house he should be afraid of. By now, she was starting to get a little scared herself. She was on the middle of the moors, in a house she wasn't familiar with, and although the boy had believed her explanation of a family of mice living under the floorboards, she was starting to doubt herself and her thoughts turned to the thinking that there was something else in the house. She'd been reading her book for about an hour when the old grandfather clock in the entrance hall started chiming midnight. She'd sat listening to it, all the while surveying her unfamiliar surroundings. Old houses always have a spooky feel to it, but whilst the clock was chiming it was almost as if the house was changing, becoming something sinister, she'd said. When the clock chimed the final tone to signify midnight, all the lights in the house went out and, even to this day, she swears blind that she heard something growl in the darkness. Now the parents had advised that because the house was old, they'd experienced power cuts all the time, and they explained how to reset the electric box to bring everything back, but before she had the chance to investigate, she heard another scream from upstairs. She raced upstairs, which proved difficult in the complete darkness, and entered the boy's room. He was hiding under his covers, but even in the darkness, she could make out his shape under the duvet. The boy was visibly shaking as my wife could see the covers fidget. After telling him that everything was all right and that the power had just gone, he muttered, "There's monsters." Losing sight of fear and becoming a little bit short with him, she reiterated for the third time that there are no monsters, and to prove it, she'd look around his room. In the jovial, obvious way that someone would search for monsters to prove there are none to a child. She looked under his bed. "No monsters here," she said. She checked his windows to make sure they were locked and secure. "No monsters getting in here," she confirmed. Finally, she walked to his wardrobe. It was one of those wardrobes that was built into the room and was very deep, opened the door and poked around, and sure enough, there's no monsters in here either. She was about to close the door when she heard heavy breathing from the back of the wardrobe. She slowly drew back the clothes on the rail and peered into the back of the wardrobe, and there, hugging his knees and rocking backwards and forwards, was the boy. "There's a monster in my bed," he said without looking up, too scared to even acknowledge my wife's presence. My wife turned her head slowly, and the bundle that she'd assumed was the boy in bed was still there, under the covers, but it had sat up, and, her eyes having adjusted slightly to the darkness, she could see through the thin cover that whatever it was looking at her. She grabbed the boy and ran downstairs to the living room. The only source of light in the house was the fire that the parents had set before leaving. For an entire hour, she and the boy hid under a blanket in the living room, all the while the noises she'd heard earlier continued upstairs. Scratchings, pacing, and a gravely moaning. The type of noises something makes when it's looking for something unsuccessfully. Finally, after what she described as an eternity but in hindsight couldn't have been long, the parents showed up. They duly paid her, something she now considers not worth the experience, and they asked if she was available for another night. She politely declined. It wasn't until a few weeks later that she told the parents what had happened when they'd come to pick the boy up from nursery. They weren't surprised. She had been the fifth babysitter in as many months that wouldn't come back. They said they'd experienced things all the time, but never to that extent. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why my wife no longer babysits privately. Story 4, Granny. My granny was a terrible person. A crotchety old woman that was hardly over 100 pounds soaking wet. She would sit in her rocking chair all day long and scowl while watching her TV game shows. She looked like a skeleton with cracked leather clinging to her bones and wisps of colorless hair sticking out from a mostly bald scalp. And she was mean. If I tried to play Legos in the living room, "You better clean those up, boy, or you'll regret the day you were born." If I laughed too loudly at whatever TV program was on, "Stop that racket. That junk will rot your brain." If I so much as walked too fast, "Quit roughhousing or else." And that "or else" wasn't an empty threat. Granny had a big cane she carried, a dark redwood one with a raven's head for the handle. I'm pretty sure she could have just used a walker to get around the house. She just liked the impression the big ole cane gave off. When she walked about, she'd smack it down with each step, hard enough to make the floor shake. If she wanted to be sneaky though, she'd not made a peep until she was right behind you. Then, with her acidic voice and stale breath, she'd whisper into your ear, "And just what do you think you're doing?" I wasn't a bad child. Not really. I didn't get a chance to be. But Granny made me so nervous I'd often forget to do things, like pick up my toys or not run indoors. And when Granny caught me, oh, I'd really would regret the day I was born. Granny didn't just spank you with her hand. She used that cane, and she'd take it across your back and your butt with all the strength in her shriveled body. It only took one whack to make you never want to sit again, and she usually brought it down 3 or 4 times. Never while Mom or Dad was around though. Nope. They never got to see the spankings. Granny was too clever. I suppose she knew they wouldn't stand for that. I hated my grandmother. From a young age I knew I hated her. She wasn't ever involved in my life except to cause me pain and humiliation. Invitations to school recitals and plays were met with scoffs. I actually tried a few times to have her come, maybe getting out of the damn house would make her lighten up a bit. Nope. She would laugh and say, "I'd rather jab my ears out with an ice pick than hear you screech on stage while calling it music, Alan." She wasn't quite so cruel when Mom was in hearing distance, but she still wasn't kind about it. It was a nightmare. I'd go to bed crying and I'd never have friends over. I was too ashamed, and I had no doubt that in one way or another Granny would drive them away. I only had the courage to bring over a friend one time. Kendra Riley. She was a fun girl, with red pigtails tied with neon green scrunchies and glasses with round lenses and cheetah print frames. She was amazing. We both liked to sit on the swings and sing during recess. We'd hold little concerts. Kendra, being the goofball she was, would ask for tips afterwards in the form of desserts or crackers. Shockingly, that sometimes worked, but she always made sure to split them evenly with me. It was half my work after all, according to Kendra. I thought maybe it'd be okay to invite her over just once. Granny was laid up in bed more often than not at the time, and I figured, why not? I walked in and was immediately met with Granny's loud screeching voice, "Wipe off your feet on the mat or else." Kendra's eyes went wide and my heart sank. "Let's just go play in my room," I whispered before taking her hand and sneaking past Granny. She didn't seem to notice that there were 2 pairs of soft footsteps going up the stairs. She was too focused on Family Feud. Once we were away from Granny, things got better again. I turned on my Disney music and we sang along. Kendra talked about a funny dream she had last night, when it was just as it was fun. Then my door slammed open and there was my Granny. She took one look at Kendra and her face went red as tomato sauce. "Why is there a girl in your room?" she shrieked before slapping me across the face, hard enough to leave a handprint. I was only 9 years old at the time. I immediately burst into tears. "I'm sorry, Granny. We just wanted to play." My sniffles went unheard as Granny grabbed Kendra by the ear and started yanking her out the door. "Come here, you little hussy. Going into boys' rooms at your age, you're going to end up barefoot and pregnant before you're 16. Kendra started to scream and tried to pull away, but Granny was unrelenting. I think I finally snapped. I was so tired of the years of torment, all the times I felt ashamed of having such a cruel grandmother, and seeing her attack one of my only friends just pushed me over my limit. I didn't shove her hard, just rough enough so she'd let go. Granny fell back on her butt with a yelp and then she clutched her chest. Oh. My heart. At first I thought she was being overdramatic, that she was trying to make me seem like some sort of monster child so my parents would ground me. But she wasn't. Her face went grey before her eyes rolled back and she passed out. Granny survived 2 days in the hospital before finally passing away. I was torn between the feeling of finally being free and the grief that I was the one who caused her heart attack. Kendra and I lied, saying that Granny just marched upstairs, started shouting, and then she had the heart attack. Nothing about me shoving her. My parents were quiet during the funeral. I somehow fell asleep to the minister's monotone voice. Had horrible nightmares in which Granny burst from the coffin and wrung my neck screaming about how I murdered her. I woke up and had to excuse myself to the restroom. I'd wet myself in fear. The next week was quiet. I was so used to Granny watching game shows or her shouting at me for something I had done. It was almost relaxing. I should have known the peace was at an end when I came home to find my mother sobbing at the kitchen table while my father was resting a hand on her back. I heard her say, "I thought she was gone this time," before I finally looked at the stove. A woman with dark hair in a tight bun and wearing a long black dress with a high neck was stirring some sort of soup. Judging by the smell it was cabbage. She turned to me, her eyes fastened on me like a hawk on its prey. "Alan, you're late for dinner. I expect you to be home at 5 p.m. every weekday. Where's your homework?" My mother wailed before burying her face in her hands. I looked beside the woman at the stove, where something was resting against the counter. A cane with a raven's head for the handle. And suddenly I recognized the woman standing there at the stove cooking dinner. That night Granny came into my room. I was numb with shock. I didn't understand. Was this really Granny? Was it a clone? Or was this some warped dream? The door creaked open and I nearly hid under my bed as the dark-haired woman walked into my room, her head held high. I pulled the blankets over me as I shook. I thought I was going to die. When I looked into her eyes, I knew she was truly Granny. Grey like cement and colder than dry ice. Granny glided across the room before she sat at the foot of my bed. She rested her chin on her cane, seemingly lost in thought for several minutes before she chuckled. "You're a lot like your mother, you know. She actually put rat poison in my breakfast. She wanted me gone too." I didn't say anything. Granny's gaze rested on me again and her mouth was twisted in a morbid smirk. "I only want what's best for you, Alan. When you listen to me, things will go according to plan. I suppose I just have to be stricter with you. Now, I expect you to be home by 5 every day. Call me Nanny now. Your mother hired me to take care of you because of what happened to your poor grandmother. Start bringing Kendra with you. Are you listening or are you nodding off?" I couldn't have fallen asleep even if I tried. I bobbed my head up and down frantically. "Good boy. Start bringing Kendra here." "Not to your room. Girls that want to be in boys' rooms by that age are no good. Don't give her any ideas but keep her around. Keep your grades above a B or you'll be punished. Your room must be clean before you leave the house. When you start going out on the weekends, you must give me a week's notice and perform extra well in your chores. And don't you try to get rid of me. You won't like it when I come back. Is that clear, Alan?" I opened my mouth but what came out was, "What will happen if I don't listen to you?" Granny laughed. A creepy, flat sound that scratched my ears and made the hair stand up on my neck. "You'll lose your privileges. Your mother used to be able to have a job, go out on Saturday nights, be married to someone she loved, be allowed 2 children. She lost those privileges. As long as you listen, Alan, you won't ever have to fear losing your privileges. I'm now 18. Nanny has ordered me to propose to Kendra tonight. We're only kids. We're in love. But we're not ready. But I don't want to lose any more of my privileges. Story 5, The Life of a Dispatcher, Neil. In the last 10 years, the influx of people moving to my city has caused for some big expansions to be done all over the city limits. People want bigger and better things, and with the rising demand the city took into consideration all the feedback from people coming and going and decided to abandon the one and only hospital we have ever known to build a bigger and better one just down the road. The transition was long but smooth, however, People still had mixed emotions as they held sentimental value on the old building that stood in practice for nearly 60 years. It was where their loved ones were either born, medically treated and/or died. The old hospital closed its doors for the very last time in 2010 in hopes that it would remain untouched. No trespassing signs and private property signs littered every external wall of the building, encouraging people to stay out. However, that didn't last, as it eventually became a hotspot for teens and young adults to explore and party. Rumors of the hospital being haunted seemed to have traveled well beyond the city limits, bringing in visitors from hours away just to try and get a peep inside. Once it was known that you could find a way in and explore, the city decided to hire a security company and tapped into the old security system and replacing all the cameras to keep an eye on any illegal activity. Despite the security enforcement, people will still break in, and depending on the situation at hand, the police will get called. For confidentiality reasons, all names have been made up. Neil. This call came in around 3:30 a.m. 911, what's your emergency? Hi, it's Neil from, business name, security. I think I need an officer to swing by or something. A man's voice came over the line. He sounded a little panicked and out of breath. Okay, can you give me the address and can you tell me why you need assistance? It wasn't out of the ordinary for security to call for backup. Address, it's the old hospitals. And I'm not sure how to explain it. He worked at a building of which I knew a lot about. A guy who had worked there previously used to call all the time, whether it be because there were trespassers or because something seemed off. Well, try to explain it as best as you can. I was checking the cameras, and as I was flipping through them, and the last guy who worked here told me about this guy that likes to hide in the nursery ward. He trailed off, seeming to have lost track of what he was saying, and continued, I'm only a week and a half on the job and it's my first day alone, and he told me that if I see this guy to scare him out of the building by threatening to call the police. Okay, and then what happened? I said, trying to press him into giving me more information. I went out to find him and kick him out of the building, but when I got up there my flashlight wouldn't work and I was told we can't turn on the lights in the building because it makes people think the hospital's still open. He trailed off again and then continued. Anyway, when I walked onto the floor he was on, I was yelling for him to come out and that if he didn't I would get the police involved, and then I could hear him laughing in some room. But I could barely see anything, so I followed his voice, and then out of nowhere I felt something scratch my arm and I could still hear the guy laughing in the distance, so I just bolted out of there. When I went back and looked at the camera, he's still in that room, and there's no one else on any of the cameras, but I have fingernails scratched on my arm, so I'm not hallucinating or anything. I could hear the panic in his voice as he spoke through what he encountered. Okay, so you were attacked by the man or by someone else? I said, confused. No, the man was still in the room laughing. Someone else attacked me, and that person is in the building somewhere and I can't find them on the cameras. Okay, police have been dispatched, they should arrive shortly. Are you okay? Do you need paramedics for your arm? No, I don't think so. It stings like a son of a bitch, but I think I'll be fine. He cut himself off mid-sentence and gasped. Neil? Is everything alright? The man, he's just gone. I've been watching him this whole time and I looked away for a second to look at my arm and he's gone. Wait, oh God. Oh God. His voice trembled as he spoke. What? Neil, what is happening? He's in the stairwells, he's running down them. What if he's coming for me? What do I do? He spoke fast, breaking into a small sniffle in his last sentence. You're in an office, correct? Is the door locked to get inside? I heard him put down the phone and quickly shuffle to the door, and then he screamed. There was a bang on the door, another scream, and then a thud. A few seconds later I could hear footsteps, and then the line went dead. Police arrived on scene no more than 30 seconds after the call ended. Neil was found in the security office with non-life-threatening injuries but unconscious when they arrived. The officers swept the entire building looking for two possible suspects, both of which could not be found. The officers said that they checked every entrance location that they knew of, but there were no signs of anyone entering the building unless they had a key to get into the hospital. Story 6, my cell phone can text people on its own. Technology is really starting to creep me out. I installed Apple's new operating system, iOS 12, on my iPhone last night. I don't know why I did it so soon. I am not a technophile or anything. Usually, I listen to reviews and wait around for a major update. But something about that red little settings icon begged to be clicked. Call it curiosity, or my incessant need to stay up to date, or just some sort of obsessive-compulsive disorder restricted to technical updates. I clicked it. 5 minutes to download. The progress bar ticked away steadily and without issue. My phone still worked fine at the time. I popped back into messages and texted my best friend. It was past midnight, but he always stayed up late. Jason is also an Android nerd, the type to turn a conversation about cell phones into a political debate. He sounded eager to talk shit. Let me know when that huge file bricks your old shitty phone lol. I tried to write back a witty reply, but my cell restarted. The logo appeared on screen. I tossed it to the side and went back to watching TV while it went through the usual steps of installing a new operating system. After a few minutes, the light turned on, and I picked it back up and entered my password. Welcome to iOS 12. The new design looked pretty sleek. I clicked through an introductory message that listed out some new features. They improved the ability to edit videos. You can now measure objects with your camera. There's a bunch of other cool stuff, but in the end, the one that really piqued my interest is Animoji. For those of you who don't know what that is, I don't blame you. Animoji are puppet-like cartoon characters, shared through text message, that can be designed to look like the user. Now, with the addition of front-facing cameras, Animojis can also react like you. All in real time. I decided to take advantage of this feature by playing a prank on Jason. I quickly clicked through the options to customize my character. I added a light skin tone, with a bunch of freckles, a beard, small nose, small head, and short black hair. My eyes are an unusual shade of blue, so I included that too. I gave him a grey hat to match the one sitting on the rack by my desk and called it a wrap. For a shoddy effort, at best, I was impressed. That corny little cartoon creature could have been my clone. I opened up messages again and steadied the camera to record my motions. The Animoji responded perfectly. If I opened my mouth to speak, the character did the same. If I batted my eyes, it batted them back. If I stuck out my tongue, it stuck out its tongue. You get the picture. It's eerie, really. I don't know how this could be considered fun for children. My message for Jason was a pretty childish one. The Animoji also has the unique ability to record your voice. I sung a fuck you medley and shook my character's head back and forth like a rag doll. It was stupid. I tried to make it seem like a dickhead puppet kind of thing. After a quick review, I sent it over and laughed at the accuracy, and my own idiocy. It took a while for Jay to respond. I thought that was weird. We had just talked a moment before. This seemed like prime Jason shit-talking material. He did not go to sleep. His status on Facebook still showed active. I messaged there a couple times and asked if he liked my gift, as a joke. He replied a minute later, "What is that voice? When did you get diagnosed with emphysema? I can barely hear you, man." His response surprised me. The feature never said anything about modifying my voice. Before I could understand anything, Jay replied again, "Okay, I just got the second message." What the fuck, man? I never told you that. I stared at the computer screen. Then I looked back at my dimmed phone. I never sent a second message. What are you talking about? I said. I waited another couple minutes for a response. Then Jason came back with a flurry of replies. They all arrived at the same time. Like a delay, of some sort, had held them back. Then he signed offline. I thought he blocked me. Stop sending me these videos. I know it's you. It's your number and it's your fucking face, man. Adam, you are freaking me out. I never told you about my sister. Why did you say my address? The last message arrived at 1:55 a.m. What is that voice? I grabbed my phone off the desk and turned it off. I didn't stop to close out the apps or anything like that. I don't know if that matters. If someone technical knows more, maybe they can help. In the next half hour, I paced around my room and waited for a reply from Jason that never came. I called his house 1,000 times. I even thought about driving over there in the middle of the night, but I didn't. In the end, I chalked the whole situation up to some creepy, reasonable phenomenon. It had to be. Maybe the wires in the cloud got crossed, or some shit. I fell asleep with the cell under my pillow and the family German Shepherd by my side. I woke up this morning to an incessant vibrating in my ear. The phone must have turned itself back on while I slept. I had several missed calls, and 2 unread texts. But Jason never replied. The messages were from an unknown number. As soon as I opened the dialog box, the bright blue eyes of my Animoji greeted me with a sardonic grin. I hit play on the video, and immediately recognized it as the one I recorded last night. "Fuck you, fuck you, fuck you," my childish voice chanted. I scrolled down to the next message. The clip played automatically. My Animoji seemed a lot more serious in this shot. It did not move its mouth. First, it tipped its head to the left, curiously. Then it tipped to the right. It smiled again. Then, 30 seconds in, the character's head continued on its axis until it rotated all the way around to its original point. I felt myself grow nauseous. Something about that movement and the positioning it suggested made me sick. It looked like a scene out of The Exorcist. Human head and necks are not meant to work like that. How can anyone move in that direction? How can anyone replicate it? The feature is brand fucking new. The character spoke, too. The voice seemed to fit Jason's description pretty well. It sounded as if the male speaker had just finished smoking a carton of cigarettes. He coughed, at first. My character reacted accordingly by covering its mouth. Then it leaned in close to the camera. My blue eyes grew wide. My mouth mouthed slowly. It enunciated 3 symbols alongside a gravely and unmistakable rusty tone. "I see you," it said. I closed the app. I threw the phone across the room and left my apartment. Again, I didn't know enough about technology to know whether this is concerning, but the entire experience shook me. I needed to get it out of my head, and I could think of only one way. The drive to Jay's house is only 5 minutes away. Angry sirens streamed down the block before I even pulled out of my driveway. I told myself that they couldn't be related. The voice in the back of my head told me they were. I returned the missed calls during on the drive. 2 unknown numbers, 1 known. My mom called from home. I dialed her back first, and her tear-choked tone confirmed my absolute worst fear. Jason's mother called. They found him in his house. "He died, Adam. I'm so sorry." My mom continued to tell me that the killer made an absolute mess of the scene. Blood covered every inch of the house. The front door was splintered into 2 pieces. She probably didn't mean to say these horrible things, but the words spilled out of her like a disease. The suspect, ultimately, walked free. I hung up and returned the other missed call. It was a voicemail. The cops checked Jay's phone. "They want to talk to me." I turned around and drove home. I am freaking out. I don't know what to do. My only defense is to pin my best friend's death on a fucking Animoji. Story 7, something was blocking my sink. Now I know what, and I wish that I didn't. We moved into my husband's grandfather's house 2 months ago. I never met the man, mostly due to the fact that according to all he was a raging homophobe and all-round awful human being. He'd lived alone for the last 35 years of his life, often even without receiving any visitors for months on end. The idea of moving into a dead, angry and discriminative old man's previous abode had never been the dream plan. However, when you get left a country estate on 4 acres of land, you're going to jump at the chance to make it home, and that's what we did immediately. To begin with, it was easy to overlook the flaws. The water, for example, often came out of the taps brown and stodgy until they'd had time to run. The cellar, which I am certain would have been a ridiculous size, was cemented in, with the door from the kitchen which had once led to it now simply leading to a small cupboard with a solitary wooden step. The floorboards were stained and scratched, some with deep grooves running through them that seemed to have no reasonable cause that we could find. Even the mice were easy enough to get rid of any ignore once we were settled. It was a home that we would never have been able to afford, so it was going to take something of epic proportions to put us off. That was all until I began to notice the kitchen sink. It was a large, old-school, farm-styled basin, made of solid stone. At one side stood the taps, rusted at the joins and the worst for pumping out the brown-green sludge when the faucets were turned. On the other side, screwed into the kitchen counter and facing directly into the sink, was an industrial 1950s meat grinder. It was the kind you could attach linings to and make your own sausages, but even more than that, it was dark grey and grotesque, and I couldn't wait for it to be ripped out with the remodel. The real issue with the sink, however, was neither the taps or the grinder, it was the drainage. If the sink was filled it could take hours to drain fully. Worse still, sometimes it would drain halfway and then start bubbling back up, the water blackened and thickened and scented with death. I watched YouTube videos, trying to figure out what might be wrong and searching for ways to remedy it. We bought caustic soda, and every brand of drain and blocker going, but nothing worked. The caustic soda made it worse for a day, happening to be a time when the plug reversed and began churning and spluttering up a deep brown and lumpy foam. The smell was so bad that we avoided the kitchen altogether that day. It was a Friday, and we had a plumber booked for Monday. The end was finally in sight for the sink that had quickly become the bane of our existence. But it got worse quickly and thoroughly the next day, filling to the brim with a congealed sludge, the scent of which seemed to be overtaken the entire house. The sludge was just beginning to lick the edges of the basin, millimeters away from spilling over, when I decided I'd had enough. I watched several more YouTube videos posted by extremely helpful plumbers, grabbed the only wrench we had and marched back into the kitchen. I'm not sure if everyone knows more about sinks and plumbing than I do, but there is a U-shaped pipe that leads down from the plug, and that is what I was aiming to remove. I tried following the instructions I'd watched, I honestly did. But when the sludge began dripping onto me, sliding down the outside of the basin and falling like large mutated raindrops, I decided I'd had enough. I took the wrench in my right hand and slammed it directly at the U-shaped pipe. One hit and it began dripping slowly. 2 hits and the brown sludge was flowing both from the sink and from the join of the pipe. 3 hits and the U flew to the corner of the unit I was crouched beside. I couldn't move quick enough when the sink emptied, all gushing from the sink, and right out onto the kitchen floor around me. The smell intensified, it was decay in the air and I could taste it. I was seconds away from vomiting when I saw it, poking from the part of the pipe that was still protruding from the wall. At the end of the pipe was a mass of tangled, dark hair. My stomach gurgled, just the sight of it was as bad as the scent in the air. I reached a wary hand forward, sure that I'd found the culprit, and not even stopping to wonder whose hair it might have in fact been. I grasped it between my fingertips, it squelched with the pressure, dripping with more of the putrid liquid that was still surrounding me, and I pulled. I'd expected that to be it, just a clump of hair, but it wasn't. It was long, continuing to go the more I pulled. I only stopped as something smaller and round slipped out of the pipe around it, splashing in the puddle of sludge beneath as it fell. Still holding the hair with my right hand, I plucked the new mystery item from the floor with my left. It was coated and dirty and difficult to make out. I knew it was most probably a small pebble or rock, but I'd heard stories of people finding long-lost diamonds and gems in ways like this, so I had to know. With my jeans already ruined by the tsunami of sludge, I saw nothing wrong with wiping clean on them. I cleaned it up and held it back up to my face. Out of context, it took me a moment to see it for what it was, but as soon as I did, a shiver ran all the way through me, from head to toe. It was no pebble. It was no diamond. It was a human tooth. I stood quickly, not even thinking about the long strands of hair that were still wrapped around my fingers. My stomach gurgled louder and my mouth grew dry. They were the surefire signs of incoming vomit. I pulled my right hand up to my mouth, recoiling as I saw the hat that was surrounding it. With a step back, and another pull of the hair, there was a pressured pop from the pipe as something else slid free. This item was connected to the hair, and I didn't have to look close to decipher what it was. It was a piece of scalp, still connected to the hair in the most disturbingly natural way. The skin was torn, jagged at the edges, and completely grayed with age. I flung the hair, and scalp, aside with a violent wave of my hand. I dropped the tooth and left the kitchen with vomit soaking through the front of my t-shirt. It had happened and I hadn't even realized. Now I was more than aware. Needless to say, we left the house that day. Police and crime scene investigators are still working on the site. They're going to dig up the cellar, and they're certain they'll find some kind of human remains down there. It all makes sense now, the issue with vermin, the filled-in cellar, the scratches and stains to the floorboards. Everyone thought he was alone, but he wasn't. He was rarely alone. The police showed us the missing persons file from the local area, and it was filled with young women, at least one a year and dating all the way back to the mid-80s. I couldn't breathe when I saw one of the most recent girls. She disappeared 2 years ago on her walk home from work. She had deep brown eyes, tan skin, and long dark hair that hung all the way to her hip. Story 8, Cuckoo. In the eyes of a parent, nothing can ever be as perfect as their child. When I was younger, I'd heard some of my friends, new age hypocrites who think they're edgy, claiming that children are parasites. That they drain your energy, your time, your finances. That having them is like signing your life away, ensuring that you will forever cease to exist as your own entity and be confined to the role of so-and-so's mother. In some ways, I guess they're right. But I still wish I could go back in time and laugh in their closed-minded faces. Avalon wasn't planned, the result of one too many margaritas, a handsome face, and a trashy bar. When I found out I was pregnant, I sat down on my shitty linoleum floor and burst into tears. The father cracked up when I broke the news to him. He refused to take me seriously for the first month or so. My parents weren't much better. I was 22, an adult in some forms of the word, but I hadn't even graduated college. I was living on cheap noodles and off-brand ice cream. I hadn't eaten a vegetable in over a month. I couldn't take care of myself. How on earth was I supposed to care for a child? Eventually, my parents warmed up to the idea of having a grandchild, even conceived through sin as she was. Avalyn's father, whose name I won't bother to mention, sobered up as well. We both moved into my parents' basement and prepared as best we could. You can't prepare, though. No matter how many maternity books you read, magazines you subscribe to, and classes you attend, nothing can prepare you for the feeling you get when you're holding your baby for the first time. She was beautiful, intriguing, magnificent, perfect. Absolutely perfect. I graduated. A couple of years later, I had Nora, too. A year after that, when I turned 26, I kicked the girl's dad out. I'd rather be a single parent than have to live with that sorry excuse for a man any longer. I moved out. My corporate job was nothing overly extravagant or important, but it paid the bills and kept me on my feet while I juggled the girls, Avalyn a babbling toddler and Nora a screaming infant. Even during the worst days, I can't forget the feeling of looking at them and feeling waves of love pour out of me. I met John, boring name for a great guy. We got married, put a down payment on a house. Our house had 5 bedrooms, a master, separate bedrooms for our 2 girls, a guest bedroom, and, within 3 years, when I was 29, a nursery. This pregnancy didn't feel any harder than the 2 that had preceded it. Truth be told, I was much more relaxed now that I'd been through this a couple of times already. John kept insisting we name the baby Harrison in honor of John's great-grandfather, and I agreed. It was a noble name for a little boy, something he could grow into, but not something awful that would get him tormented at school. Little baby Harrison. I chatted to my growing stomach and prepared the girls as much as I could. I kept telling them about their new baby brother. Nora was 3 now and would put her hand on my stomach and feel him kick with a kind of stern interest that stopped short of excitement. Evelyn was worse. She would scowl whenever John or I said his name, and I'd sometimes catch her staring at my stomach with detestation. I thought it was normal. This was a huge change for them, and I think they knew this baby was, by blood, a half-sibling, and therefore different from them. Besides, in some ways they were still adjusting to John's presence in our lives. I just figured they would grow out of it. Labor wasn't too bad, comparatively. Nora had been painful and Evelyn had been worse, much worse, but this was all right once I had my epidural. We hadn't let the doctor tell us the baby's sex. I mean, why would we? We already knew. I think you know where this is going. We didn't have a name ready for her because we hadn't thought we'd need any name besides Harrison. We wound up naming her Rosie because of her bright, blushing cheeks. She was beautiful, even if she wasn't what we expected. John just smiled and said maybe we'd have another later, and odds were it'd be a boy. Rosie and I both received a clean bill of health. The obstetrician told me, with a cheerful grin, that Rosie was one of the healthiest babies he'd ever delivered. I was proud. Nora and Evelyn came to see us in the hospital. Evelyn kept staring at Rosie with the same look she'd given my pregnant belly. I asked if she wanted to hold her or give her a kiss, but she said no before the questions were even finished. Nora followed her big sister's lead and gave Rosie a stone-faced scowl. John was devastated, but I tried to reassure him. It's a big change for them, I reasoned. They'll get used to her. I promise. Years passed, but they didn't get used to her. As they all grew, Rosie seemed to get pushed to the side more and more often. Even at 9 and 6, Evelyn and Nora shunned their baby sister, and it seemed to get worse the older they all got. By the time Rosie turned 6 and Evelyn turned 12, the rift had only deepened. I tried everything. First I cajoled, then I wheedled, then I screamed. I reminded Evelyn that she was way too old to be pulling this kind of thing, that Nora didn't know any better and was following her lead, that Rosie was too young and didn't deserve any of this. But she stood firm. She hated her little sister with a fiery passion, and she started to hate John and me because we kept scolding her for it. She kept asking us why we loved Rosie more than we loved her. She kept asking why we couldn't see that Rosie wasn't the perfect angel we were making her out to be. It was beyond disheartening for me. We saw about a dozen different family counselors, and all the sessions turned out the same, with Evelyn and Nora sitting as far away from Rosie as they could get and Rosie staring at them with her wide, innocent, wounded eyes. I started forcing them to spend quality time together. I would set Rosie up with a dollhouse and invite Nora and Evelyn to come play. Nora would stare longingly at the dollhouse a lot of the time, but Evelyn never budged. She would stay in the room just long enough for me to leave, then I would hear her door slam. What was I supposed to do? Evelyn was 14, Nora was 11, and Rosie was 8, just about to turn 9. It was Labor Day. The girls all had the day off, but John and I still had to work. I decided to leave the 3 girls home alone, something I never did. I know what you're thinking. Evelyn 14 and I hadn't ever left them home alone. But before you judge me, you have to understand that my blood would run cold whenever Evelyn's gaze landed on her baby sister. I didn't want to leave them alone because, truth be told, I didn't think Evelyn cared enough to keep Rosie out of trouble. But Rosie was mature for her age, and I left a note with my work number and my cell number written on it. I told her to call me if anything happened. John and I were both nervous wrecks, but my friends had all been telling me this was exactly what the girls needed, and I thought they were right. Part of me was always whispering that this was my fault, that I was a bad mother and should have done this several years ago. Besides, Evelyn would probably just shut herself up in her room. Nora and Rosie got along well enough when Evelyn wasn't there to get between them. At 1:48 p.m., my cell phone rang. I answered it immediately. Hello? I could hear some heavy breathing on the other end of the line, then Rosie whimpered, "Mommy? What is it?" I asked immediately, my heart pounding and sweat already beginning to trickle down the back of my neck. "What's wrong, honey?" "Mommy," she whined again, and then the line went dead. I ran out without bothering to tell anyone where I was going. My job was far less important than my children, and I had an awful sinking feeling in my gut. I knew Evelyn hated her sister, but she wouldn't do anything, right? Right? I probably ran at least 3 red lights and stop signs on my way home. Countless disgruntled drivers blared their horns at me, but I didn't care. All that mattered was me getting home in time to figure out why Rosie had sounded so desperate. I tried dialing our home phone about 20 times, but it just rang and rang and rang. I flung my car into park and ripped the keys out of the ignition. My trembling hands could hardly get the key in the lock. I was screaming Rosie's name the second I got the door open, but there was no response. In a house with 3 girls, the silence was more horror-inducing than anything else. I raced through the living room and into the kitchen, but there was no one there. I ran toward the stairs, which were situated by the laundry room in the back of the house. The girls' bedrooms were all upstairs. I froze when the stairs came into view. There was a crumpled form lying at the bottom of the stairs, her neck twisted at an unnatural angle. My heart dropped into my shoes. I knew who it was, not small enough to be Rosie and not big enough to be Evelyn. I started sobbing, sucking in great, gasping breaths. I threw up on the floor and wanted nothing more than to sink to the ground in despair. But I couldn't. With great effort, I sidestepped Nora's body and started stumbling up the stairs, wailing for Rosie. I turned and headed into Nora's room first. The pink walls and unicorn-inspired decor seemed hollow when I knew Nora would never be in here again. But even through my tear-filled eyes I could tell there wasn't anyone in there. I staggered backward out of her room and went into Evelyn's. But that, too, was empty. I could barely see because of the stinging tears, and I'm pretty sure I was going into shock. Still, I had to find Rosie. I had to find my baby. I went into the bathroom and almost slipped in the blood. Evelyn was lying half in and half out of the bathtub. There was still thick blood oozing from her chest, where a knife was lodged. Her eyes were still open, aimed unseeingly and pleadingly at the door. My screams lessened to a whine, but I had to find her. She was all I had left. My shoes were covered in slick, greasy blood. I tracked it onto the carpet as I headed down the hall. Her door was wide open, and I could see her standing in front of the window, her back to me. There was blood spattered on her arms. "Rosie," I gasped, my breath catching in my throat. She turned slowly to face me. Her eyes were dreamy and far away. "Mommy," she said. I had to swallow another wave of bile. "Rosie," I blubbered, what happened here?" For several seconds, she said nothing. Then, her lips twisted up into a smile. Story 9, My cat is turning into a fish. That's all. This is probably one of the most ridiculous things you have ever read. Still, this matter is just too absurd to keep it to myself. And no, I have no idea whether the thing I took home from the animal shelter actually was a cat at any point in its life. Maybe it's some kind of shapeshifter? Maybe an imposturous monster? So, to start off, it looked normal when I adopted it. Cute little kitten with huge eyes and red, white and black fur, making it look like a rag doll. It was a she. I called her Raggedy. Raggedy and my other cat, a grey feline called Cloudy, got along perfectly fine. Everything was great, until one day, while I was sitting on my couch playing with my cats, I noticed something shiny amongst, or rather underneath the soft fur on Raggedy's belly. I grabbed her and placed her on my lap. She meowed somewhat cheerfully as I gently turned around her little body so she was laying on her back. Carefully, I stroked over the shiny spot. I felt something odd. Not really hard or rough, but definitely strange and almost a little cold to the touch. I lowered my head to take a closer look. It was kind of hard to make out amongst the belly fluff at first, and it took me a while to figure out what I was looking at. But then I realized it. It was a patch of tiny silver scales. I frowned. "What the?" I murmured. As you can probably understand, I really did not know what to think of it at that moment. I mean, there were shiny scales on my cat's underbelly. That was not normal, right? Of course, the first thing I did was to look all over Raggedy's entire body to find out if there were more of these things. And sure enough, there were. I found about 3 other smaller patches of the same shiny, silver scales on her belly, back and chest. Then, I called the local vet. The so-called clinic was very small and their only secretary was apparently busy, so I got the vet herself on the phone. And even though I was really worried, it was hard for me to remain serious throughout the phone call. I told her who I was and that I had been there with my new cat just a few days ago for their rabies vaccination. Then, I started describing the issue. I just found a few weird patches of skin on her body. I really don't think it's healthy. What exactly do you mean by weird? The doctor asked. I paused for a moment, thinking about how I could inform her about my findings without coming off as either crazy or as if I was playing a stupid prank on her. Well, it appears she has been starting to grow scales. Like a fish. A long moment of silence followed. I pressed my mouth shut, trying not to chuckle in amusement. I could only begin to imagine what the vet must have thought hearing this. Is this supposed to be a joke? Seriously, I've got work to do here. I swear, doctor, it's not. Can I bring her over, like, now? This really needs to be examined. The vet took a deep breath. Okay, I'll have a look at whatever you define as scales. Please make sure to get here as soon as possible though if you want me to look over it right away. I have another appointment scheduled in an hour. I sighed in relief. I'll be there in a second, thanks. About 15 minutes later, I stood in the vet's examination room, next to me Dr. Candace. I explained everything to her again. I could tell that she still did not actually believe me. It was only when I lifted up Raggedy from the basket I had brought her in and Dr. Candace carefully took the small cat into her arms that her expression changed. She gently placed her on the table in the middle of the room. Turning Raggedy onto her back, she bent down and touched her fur cautiously. Can you see them? The scales? I asked, clutching the basket excitedly. I do. This is strange. I've never seen anything like this. And you just noticed that today? Yes, I called you right away, I answered. Dr. Candace continued to examine the kitten's fur. Then, she suddenly waved me over to her. You should see this. I frowned. There, on Raggedy's back, between the tufts of fur held to the side by the vet for me to see, was a tiny, almost transparent fin. It looked like that of a baby fish, far from being fully grown yet unmistakable. I swallowed. What on earth is happening to my cat? I asked, but the doctor only shook her head. I would like to tell you, I really would, but the thing is, I have no clue. Both of us know what it looks like, but I guess we will just have to wait and see what happens. With that, she accompanied me to the door and told me to please inform her about any new developments on the phone. Arriving back home, I felt exhausted. I no longer was amused by Raggedy's weird scales. Now, it was all just confusing and worrying me. I decided to take a nap, so I gave my cats a few snacks and then went to bed once more. I woke up in the late afternoon. Upon opening my eyes, my gaze fell onto a curled-up figure on my bedsheets. It was Raggedy. But then again, it was not. The lower half of her body had turned into one big, silver caudal fin. I gasped at the sight, causing Raggedy to lift her head, looking at me with those adorable little eyes. I sat up and began patting her. What am I supposed to do with you? I mumbled. I couldn't just abandon her. She was still my cat, even though she would be my fish soon. I decided to buy an aquarium. Maybe there was still a way to treat this metamorphose, but just to be safe. I read a few reports about mythical animals with the ability of changing their shape, but I'm obviously not convinced. Even if these are anything more than legends, how are the chances that I would encounter one in an animal shelter? Still, a theory based on said myth has been growing in my mind. Maybe Raggedy was not a cat at all when she was with her first owners and was given away when she morphed into one. I don't know anything about her past after all. I guess there is nothing I can do but speculate. But I will keep her. It will still be the three of us, me, Cloudy, and Raggedy, the Fish Cat. Story 10, Memoriam. When my grandmother died, she left behind a house full of junk, a stray cat she'd been feeding, and not much else. At least, that's what my dad told me. Lacey McCullen had immigrated to New York from Scotland as a little girl, and generations of life and death had left her cupboards filled with heirlooms and trinkets from the Highlands, dusty photographs, and jaundiced, fragile handwritten letters. It was a stack of those letters that I knocked over, kicking up a thick cloud of dust that made me sneeze so hard I saw stars. Already I was regretting my decision to help clean the place out. My dad crossed the doorway to the kitchen where she kept the armoire I was rooting through, then took a step back and stopped. His skinny arms visibly strained from the weight of the box he carried. "Think you could give your frail old dad a hand here?" I rolled my eyes, though I don't think I'd pulled off the sullen look since high school. "You're far from frail, Dad. Maybe in the legs. Cycling does nothing for the arms." "Oh, they're gonna fall off. You'll have to take care of your poor, armless father." "Drama queen," I snorted even as I walked over to brace my hands under the box and lift it. Jesus, it really was heavy. Ugh, what's in here? The family cinder blocks? Family photos, more like. Here, set it on the coffee table. We did so gently, and I half feared the glass panel on the table would crack under the box's weight. After taking the lid off, I could see why it was so heavy. It was filled to the brim with photos in antique frames, some solid wood, others metal, all tarnished and darkened with age as the photos inside were pale. "Whoa, whoa is right," my dad said, hands on his hips. "These could date back 150 years. The McCullens from the old country probably didn't have the money lying around to get their pictures taken, but who knows?" I reached out and gingerly picked up a picture in a dull pewter frame. It looked relatively recent, but in the photo, my grandma still had thick, dark hair and a bright smile alongside her advancing laugh lines and crow's feet. Her hands sat on the broad shoulders of a man who looked strikingly like her, with wire rim glasses and tweeds. "That's your great-uncle Liam," my dad said. "Wow. He can't have died long after that picture was taken. Pancreatic cancer." I grimaced. Grandma had battled ovarian cancer off and on for most of her adult life. I had dim memories of her sitting bald and skeletal in the chemotherapy room where I visited her as a kid. I imagine at that point, going into remission hadn't even been exciting anymore. It wasn't a question of if the cancer would kill her, but when. My dad must have detected my gloomy train of thought, because he picked up another picture frame in a hurry. "Oh, wow. Lex, check it out. It's her with her old quilting buddies." I looked over to see a much newer photo of Grandma nestled in with a whole bunch of old women, all lined up and smiling as they held up a huge quilt. That one genuinely made me grin. I never knew my grandmother as well as I would have liked to, but I knew how much she loved quilting. She could spin patches of plain fabric into real works of art that would probably stay in the family for generations. A few of her creations lived at my dad's house, brought out of the closet for frigid Syracuse winters or hanging up on the walls to be shown off. Grandma wasn't my dad's mom, she was my mom's. Honestly, when my mom died in a car crash when I was 13, it really did tear me apart. So it was weird to feel so little for the loss of Grandma, my last connection to her. I hadn't been to see the old lady since I graduated college nearly 5 years ago. I felt like that should have made me sadder than it did, but it was like trying to miss a limb that I never had. It was sad in theory. I could have gotten closer to her, and now I never would. But, that was that. Oh, my God. If you'll forgive the cliché, I'd forget my head if it wasn't screwed on. "Lex, this reminded me, your grandmother wanted you to have something." I looked up, blinking, as I sat the frame I was holding back in the box. But when I did, something else in the box came loose and fell to the bottom with a small tap. "Oh." Gently, I pried the picture frames apart to try and catch sight of the bottom. I could make out something flat, white, and decidedly not framed tucked in the corner. I nicked it out and turned it over in my fingers. It was an old Polaroid, completely out of place in this box of relics. It held the hazy image of my grandmother looking younger and happier than I'd ever seen her, cheek to cheek with another woman. This other woman's hair was as pitch black as my grandmother's, my mother's and mine, but it flew everywhere in wild curls, tamed only by a red headscarf. She had a regal look about her, all piercing eyes and sharpness, looking straight at the camera, clearly aware of her own beauty, and maybe my grandmother's, too. Just below the photo, in faded ink, were the written words, Sabina and me. I flipped it over and showed my dad. Who's Sabina? He peered at it and blinked, frowning. I have no idea. Shrugging, I set it down on top of all the other frames. You said she wanted me to have something? Dad snapped his fingers. Right. Actually, that's why I was so keen on getting you over here, he explained as he turned on his heel and went into the hallway where we had pulled the ladder down from the attic. I wanted you to see this thing in person. I think it's something really special. Intrigued, I stood there eagerly as he clambered up the ladder and disappeared into the dark. I heard the sounds of boxes shuffling, the unmistakable tinkle of breaking glass, and a muffled, "Shit. Tell me you didn't break it, Dad." No, that was a Christmas ornament. Okay, fire in the hole. I yelped as Dad chucked something wide and hefty out of the hole in the ceiling, and reflexively reached for it. The something landed with a whomp in my arms, hopefully unharmed. Dad climbed back down and got both feet planted on the floor. All right, let's take a look. Examining it, I could clearly see it was a quilt. That was pretty exciting. I'd admired the ones she made for my mom ever since I was a kid, and now I might have one of my own. Even if I didn't know her very well in life, I'd have something to remember her by. We laid it out on the sofa to get a better look, and then I fell in love. Deep purple fabric bordered the quilt and led my gaze inward, where I could see she had expertly layered light and dark gray fabric to give the illusion of dense forest. She had even added squares of black and green to the stripes, giving each tree trunk its own unique pattern of moss and decay. The branches reached down from the top of the quilt, their points finely trimmed and deftly sewn into the base fabric. But what caught my eye was, well, the eye. In the middle of the quilt, the forest parted to reveal a single disembodied eye, its white stunning against the dark, and its black pupil staring out impassively. It was weirdly eerie and totally my style. Maybe Grandma knew me better than I thought she did. Dad shuddered at the sight of it. Okay, creepy. Lacey must have been reading Lovecraft while making this for you. I turned, surprised. Wait, she made this just for me? Dad smiled a little sadly. I mean, you're her flesh and blood. All that's left of it. In fact, if she was going to finish one last quilt before she passed, it was going to be yours. I didn't want anything out of what was still left in the house. I was enough of a hoarder as it was. Still, it seemed sad that all those pieces of a family history, starting from across the ocean, would probably just end up in an estate sale or at a Goodwill. But I guess nothing lasts forever. As I was standing in the driveway and packing up my car, something solid and warm rubbed against my leg, nearly making me drop the quilt. I jumped and looked down to see a big grey tomcat, looking a little worse for wear but staring up at me in what seemed like a friendly way. It's hard to tell with cats. So, hey, you found Dumpster. Or he found you, my dad said brightly, coming out of the house and down the front walk. Speaking of which, he pulled a cat carrier out from behind his back and held it up. I groaned. Hey, I've been telling you, if you want to live alone, you should at least have a pet. I sent a glance downward at the cat, apparently named Dumpster. He squinted up at me, which I knew was cat language for a smile. And besides, without your grandma, he's got nobody to feed him. So, okay, all right, you win. Consider my journey towards becoming a crazy cat lady begun, I said as I snatched the carrier from him. To my surprise, when I held the carrier door open, Dumpster hopped right in. I could appreciate a cat that could go with the flow. That didn't last, though, because Dumpster flipped his shit when I sat him in the car. He hardly stopped yowling the entire 2-hour drive. More than once I considered dropping him at a gas station. But that would maybe make me the meanest person ever. And besides, if my grandma liked him enough to feed him every day, he couldn't be all bad. I drove back to Syracuse with my souvenirs, the quilt on the passenger's seat, which seemed to make the whole car feel a little warmer, the caged furry monster, and the Polaroid in my jacket pocket. The one of my grandma and Sabina, whoever she was. That night was supposed to get pretty freezing, despite it being only September, so I decided to give my new quilt a warm welcome and spread it out over my bed, ready to snuggle up. I seriously loved it. It was homemade, so definitely quality, it was sentimental, and it was suitably gothy for my tastes. Dumpster had calmed down immediately after getting out of the car, but I couldn't get him to come in my room under pain of death. He actually hissed at me when I tried to bring him in to sleep in my bed. Fine by me, he could have the couch. A glass of red wine and a couple of podcasts knocked me out, and I slept under my new quilt like a tipsy baby. The next morning I woke up for my day off to a stinging, burning sensation. Groggily, I dragged myself out of bed and tried to figure that out. Patches of my left arm and leg were slightly red and raised, and warm when I touched them. What the hell? I croaked, and winced at the persistent sting. Had I gotten sunburned on the drive back somehow? With my dad's southern Italian blood, I had never burned easily. And in those weird blotches? I shuffled into the bathroom and dug around in the cabinet for any aloe gel I had lying around. I found an old, possibly expired bottle of the stuff and squeezed the bright green goo into my palm, then slapped it onto one of the pink patches. Fuck. The bottle clattered to the floor as I nearly doubled over in blinding pain. Stinging doesn't describe it, it was more like a cross between being set on fire and electrocuted. It subsided, though, but not a second too soon. As it ebbed into something manageable, I collected myself. What the hell? This was officially weird. In my experience, aloe solved everything, but here I was fighting back tears and punching the wall. This was no ordinary rash. The internet yielded few useful results, save for contact dermatitis, which was troubling. Was I allergic to something in the quilt? That would seriously blow. At any rate, I figured out shortly that the rash was fine as long as I didn't touch it. And I deserved it anyway. Why? I went about my day off, playing games, catching up on some writing projects I'd taken on the side. Praise be the gig economy. But something nagged at me as I did. A weird feeling almost like guilt hung onto me all day. Was this about the Polaroid? Back at my grandma's house, I'd gotten the weirdest feeling that I should take it. I can't explain why. But maybe I was just being nosy and trying to justify it. So maybe Grandma had a side chick, back in the day. It really wasn't my business. That night I decided to conduct an experiment. I took the quilt off my bed and hung it up on the wall, where it looked equally bitchin', honestly. If my rash went away, maybe something in the quilt was bugging me. Maybe that was correlation and not causation, but I wasn't eager to worsen these weird burning spots. That night I bundled up under an afghan and looked up at that eye, surrounded by trees, and felt like it was looking back. The next morning my rash had gone from angry pink welts to pale patches, only gently burning. So that was that. It sucked that I couldn't sleep under my grandma's quilt, but I guess that was the price I had to pay for both the wicked wall tapestry and non-miserable skin. Work started out boring. Some co-workers gave me their condolences for my grandma, and I didn't really know what to say outside of stock responses. But I knew from experience that feeling weirdly detached was vastly preferable to grief. Then I copy-edited. It's mechanical, kind of bland work, but sometimes I get to read cool stuff, and when I don't, I get to mess around on the internet when my boss isn't around. BuzzFeed was in the middle of telling me what iconic 90s sitcom my life was when a new window popped up, from Facebook. Someone had messaged me. I clicked over to it and saw the chat window from what was clearly a bot or a spam account. She had a gibberish name and a stock profile pic. She had said hey. I was about to block the thing before it could ask for any credit card info when it said, "You got a quilt right." I paused, blinked, frowned, and typed, "Yes." 3 dots popped up, then. "Let me take it off your hands." I snorted. Okay, weird coincidence that some person wanted a quilt. "Nah, I'm good." She typed again. "You don't get it. It's watching." My gut twisted. What? Suddenly, all I could think of was that but it was just fabric. Literally just a goddamn quilt. Against my better judgment, maybe, I responded. "Who are you?" "A friend." "I'll take it off your hands, you gotta meet me though. We can throw them off a trail." Okay, that was over the line of weird for me. I blocked them and went back to work with way more vigor than before. Probably to distract myself. I was still shivering. It's watching? I've always been a pragmatic person. I don't believe in ghosts or demons or surveillance quilts. But something about all of this felt wrong. So when I got home that night, I looked the quilt up and down, looking for a tiny camera or a microphone, anything that indicated I was being watched. I didn't find anything. At least, nothing like that. I looked over it, and suddenly felt that something was implacably different about it than when I had first seen it. It felt like I was playing one of those spot the difference games, without knowing what it had been like to start with. But something was different, I knew it. And then I felt prickles work their way up my neck as I realized the quilt had more than one eye. I found one at the base of one of the trees on the right-hand side, one in between the branches near the middle of the top, and one just beneath the eye right in the center. I looked for more, but found none. They were right there, too. Rendered in black scraps of fabric, impossible to miss. How would I have missed them before unless they hadn't been there? With a shaking hand I pulled out my phone and had the good sense to snap a picture of the quilt as it was. Maybe I could chalk the extra eyes up to just not seeing them the first time, like one of those illusions that you can't unsee once you see. But with a picture, I would know what I saw. Then, alongside the picture, I kept a daily journal of the quilt on my phone, checking it every morning for a week. Here's what I wrote. The 9th of December 2018. I don't know what I saw. I don't goddamn know. I knew I saw only one eye, and then I knew I saw four, and that's when I started this log, so I would keep track. But now there's 6. There's 6 on the quilt and 6 in the picture, like they were there the whole time. This is officially freaky. I don't want to get rid of the thing, it's the last gift my grandmother ever gave me. What kind of person would I be to chuck it just because I'm tripping out? I need to get a grip. The 13th of September 2018. 7 now. The log is helping cause I at least know what I thought I saw one day. But the picture is proving useless. Whatever is on the quilt is in the picture too. If anything, that's making me feel more like I'm going crazy. The 14th of September 2018. Okay, I said fuck the picture and I'm keeping a tally. Now there's 9 eyes at least. I'm starting to suspect that it's not my car or my room dumpster hates. It's the quilt. So that's right out of a horror movie. The 15th of September 2018. I keep losing the piece of paper I'm keeping score on. I know where everything in my house is. But I keep losing this scrap of paper. Gonna keep it tacked up next to my bed. 10 eyes. The 16th of September 2018. Woke up this morning to find a tiny scrap of paper with scorch marks on it tacked to my bed. All that's left of my count from yesterday. I don't believe in demonic shit. I didn't. But what the fuck is this? 12 today. The 17th of September 2018. Got another message from whoever tried to get the quilt from me the other day. On a new account. Maybe they got deleted. Or maybe something isn't letting them get through to me that easily. Okay, that sounds insane. But at this point I don't know what to think. They said, "You ready to toss it yet?" Yeah, I nearly am, you smug fuck, thanks. 14. The 18th of September 2018. There are 22 eyes. What the hell? I don't know what to think. It's not hurting me. But it's scaring me. This doesn't make sense and At that point I stopped typing, because I got another Facebook message from guess who. I really was about to tell them fine, they could have the fucking quilt if they wanted whatever it was in their house, that was their prerogative. But they just had one thing to say. "You should really see this." And then, a screenshot of an email that had failed to send. From my grandma to my dad. just before the day she died. From LaceyMac@.com. 2. jscareseller9@.com. J, please, I can't explain here, they won't let me. Do not give Lex that quilt. I love you, my dear. Raw, sour fear pooled in the back of my mouth, made my throat close up and pricked at my eyes. Whatever this thing was, my grandma didn't want it anywhere near me. So fuck it. It was coming down, and burning in a ditch somewhere far away. I yanked the quilt off the wall as hard as I could, sending the tacks flying, tossing it over my shoulder, ready to be done with it. Except then I dropped it, letting it fall to the carpet in a soft bundle, frozen where I stood, when I saw the wall behind it. Eyes. Dozens upon dozens of them, burned into the wood, staring down at me, watching me. I reached out a trembling hand and brushed the scorch marks. They were still warm. My phone rattled the side table where it sat as it vibrated. Not daring to tear my gaze away from the wall, I backed up and blindly felt for it, then opened it. I had one new text. Private number, 7:19 p.m. We see you. Story 11, the wrong bus took me to the void. I had taken the wrong bus. I pressed the stop button and glanced around myself in embarrassment, despite the obvious fact that nobody could possibly recognize or care about my predicament. I leaned heavily on one of the bus poles as I realized, even worse, the next bus stop was probably a 10-minute walk away from the station. Arriving, the bus stopped with a heavy jolt. I walked out the front door. As I stepped into the chilly October air, I noticed flecks of white beginning to drift slowly down from the sky. I always loved winter, and this was a sign that it was coming sooner than usual. More importantly, it made me feel a bit better about the walk. White landscapes, snowmen, and most importantly, snowballs had always been my favorite things, and I couldn't help but reach out to try and catch a snowflake. I was surprised when I didn't feel the familiar cold of a snowflake when it hits your skin, or the tiny drop of water it melts into in your hand. Whatever the thing was, it wasn't a snowflake. It was more like a fleck of dust, or a minuscule cotton ball. Upon looking more closely, it seemed to fade away in my hand until it was completely gone. Something about it made me feel uneasy. There could have been plenty of explanations. Maybe it was waste from a nearby factory or production process being picked up by the wind and blown over here. Perhaps there was a building fire, or a forest fire, and it was soot. But somehow, I knew that this was different. Soot doesn't just disappear in your hand. I nervously walked to the intersection and waited for the light to switch. I crossed to the other side and began my anxious walk back to my bus stop, staring into the sky at the strange particles as I did. The sky began to darken. The clouds turned an eerie gray and the light began to fade. Something changed inside of me and I felt calm rather than scared. Even though I didn't know what was happening, I felt inclined to act as if I did, to keep walking forward and ignore the strange happenings. As I was walking, I saw in the distance another bus approaching, which was strange considering I knew the buses at my campus came at 15-minute intervals. I noticed the strange silence around me. Usually people are everywhere at this time, 4 p.m., but the street was completely vacant. There wasn't even a car driving down the street. Only that bus. As the bus approached, I began to make out the route number. 10 to the Natural Science Building. The same bus route I had just taken. As it came closer, I noticed that the driver seemed rather familiar, and that the ads on the side of the bus were identical to the ones that were on the one I had taken only 3 minutes ago. The bus stopped across the street with a jolt. It was mostly empty. I swear I recognized the clothing of the girl at the front of the bus, facing away, about to get off at the stop. The man at the back, wearing glasses, looked nearly exactly the same as someone who was just sitting at the back of my bus. Out of the front of the bus, the girl with the purple sweater and jeans hugged herself slightly as she touched the cold air. She looked up into the sky and smiled as she saw what she must have assumed was snow, drifting slowly down from the sky. She stuck her hand out in spite of herself, and tried to catch one of the flakes. Her facial expression changed as she caught one, and she examined it in her hand for a moment before approaching the intersection to wait for the light. The bus passed and continued on its route. The girl was me. I stood paralyzed while she crossed the street. I stood paralyzed while she approached me. She kept walking by, oblivious to me as she continued her way down the road. I followed. The strange dust in the air seemed to get thicker. I tapped her on the shoulder and she kept walking as if she didn't feel it. As I reached my hand out to tap her again, I saw that my fingers floated through her sweater, phasing through her as if immaterial. To someone who wasn't in the state that I was, this would have all been petrifying. Yet something about me had changed. I felt emotionless. I felt as if I didn't exist, yet I did. I could think and observe things. I drifted over to a nearby bench and sat down. The girl, me, walked into the distance, over a hill until I lost sight. I saw another bus approaching in the distance. Number 10, to the Natural Science Building. Another me walked out of it again. Caught snowflake. Crossed the street. Walked away. And again. And again. And again. The whole time I sat in silent observation. The whole time the air began to thicken with the strange dust until everything seemed like a white void. I could no longer see myself coming out of the bus, crossing the street, and walking down the road, yet somehow I knew it was still repeating. I don't know how long I sat there, emotionless, staring straight into what looked like an endless, flaky, white abyss. But I do know that much of me is still there. At first it was only parts of me that made their way back into the reality I was used to. I would catch glimpses of myself in classes, doing homework, doing chores, at club meetings. Eventually, I gained the ability to control my actions in these visions, rather than just watching myself act as if I was in a movie. Soon enough, I would find myself in these visions for most of my time on that bench, and I could finally live my life as if things were normal. Eventually the reality of sitting on the bench in the abyss faded away, as I became dominated by my visions. But I know I'm still on that park bench. Sometimes I go back in my dreams, when I fall asleep. Sometimes, if I am sitting in a quiet place, with nobody around me, I'll find myself back there, staring mindlessly into nothingness. I am always terrified in those moments that my visions of a normal life won't come back, but they always have, and hopefully they always will. I have lost any sense that anything in this vision world is real. The things that I do and see are fiction, the people, my family, even this computer and the social community I am posting to. I have lost the real world, and I have lost hope of ever finding it again. My post here is mostly just aimed at collecting my thoughts and making myself feel better about my situation. Yes, the comments on this post are fiction, the upvotes, the subreddit, but when everything else is fiction too, it doesn't even matter. Thank you, fictional characters in my illusion, for reading my story. I know you are all aspects of my mind, but I would appreciate any insight you might have that could explain what is happening to me, and how I might be able to fix it. This might be a chance for me to reach parts of my consciousness that know how to escape this nightmare, parts of my consciousness that I don't have access to through conventional means. Thank you.